Hello, and welcome to Interfaith Connections. I am your host, Jackie Fuller. Today we'll be discussing faith-based advocacy, and we're still continuing on our social justice discussion. Particularly, this is going to be a really interesting one because it deals with one of the newer spiritual movements. When I say new, we're talking about within the last 150 years or so, and that is the New Thought movement. And I have representatives here from the Washington, D.C. area to join in the conversation. And we're starting first with Reverend Dr. Raymont Anderson, who's an interfaith minister, and he's also affiliated with the Center for Spiritual Living. Mm-hmm. And we also have Reverend Alex Escudero. I know I'm going to kind of get it. Help me here with that.
Escudero.
Escudero, mm-hmm. Yes, thank you, and forgive me for that. And she's also a minister here in D.C. with one of the Center for Spiritual Living churches. So I'm very excited to have both of them on the program today. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
So for our audience who's not familiar with the New Thought movement, can you tell us exactly, probably for the first time, what is New Thought?
Sure. Well, New Thought actually isn't new in terms of all of our teachings are based on ageless wisdom. So when we're studying New Thought, we look at the sacred texts that were written thousands of years ago, and that's what we study. And we try to bring a new perspective to those. We try to look at the universal themes that are common to all religions and philosophies and take the best and synthesize that. In fact, it was about 100 years ago that a man named Ernest Holmes studied the major religions and wrote a book called Science of Mind that did exactly that looked at the universal principles that are still very much valid today and apply to all people.
Okay. And do you have a perspective that's similar?
Well, it's very similar. The only thing that I would probably add on to for layman folk is New Thought is a different way of looking at one's traditional spiritual practice, taking the words and going deeper with them in a metaphysical way, and then finding the practical way to apply your spiritual practice. Because otherwise it's a theoretical thing, and for us, New Thought is very practical and applicable. If you can't demonstrate it, then it's just a theory.
And when you say metaphysics, what does that entail? Is that a philosophy? Is this something you learn in a science class?
So yes, metaphysics is a philosophy. It's a branch of philosophy. Mm-hmm. And when I say we look at things metaphysically, it would be like, suppose you took any of Jesus's parables and you said, okay, the parable, the prodigal son, and you would look at it and say, what is the deeper philosophical truth of this, taking away the place that it's coming from. So it's not from the Bible, it's not being spoken of in this way, but how does this story specifically apply to me? So if I were the father in the story, what is the lesson in this? If I'm the son who stayed home, what is the lesson for me? If I am the son who left home, what is the lesson for me? And then synthesize all of this and say, now, how does this make me a better person in my walk, in my spiritual practice?
Interesting. Which I would tie into how you explain that with social justice and New Thought. You speak, there's a father, and there are these two children, and they have two different paths. Mm-hmm. And in the New Thought community, you have people from all kinds of paths. And when you hear social justice, it could come up in variety ways for a variety of people. So when you see at the same time, New Thought really hasn't been engaged in any social justice awareness thing, probably outside of the environmental space. What are your thoughts in regards to New Thought, social justice, and how, I would say nowadays, new century, new times, I feel like there's a push for the New Thought community to be more engaged in the world and to some degree dealing with social justice. How do you handle that as ministers when these conversations come up?
Well, as Dr. Ray said, we're very practical, and we're actually at the same center, the Center for Spiritual Living in D.C., and we very much want to give tools to those who come and visit us or become members at our center. So we we want to be able to relate to what's going on, in the news, what's going on in the world, and basically we're trying to build a community where people feel safe to be themselves. And our purpose is to be radically inclusive and spiritually progressive. So we're always trying to evolve to hear what is ours to do in response to some of the violence that we're witnessing in the world. And so in terms of social justice, first we want people to feel like there's a place where they can come to and just express, how they're feeling about what's going on. And we certainly believe that we can't have peace without justice. So that's just fundamental.
Okay.
And just as an added, we were already involved in both the Women's March and the 1,000 Ministers March that recently happened.
Okay.
And we also, for 2 years in a row, have had a booth at Pride to show that we support these various elements of the community. And as Reverend Alex said, to make it a inclusive and welcoming environment. So social justice and how it shows up in the world, if you don't talk about it and you don't address the illness that racism is or sexism is or homophobia, if you don't address it, then the philosophy, this teaching, can never change that. And a lot of people sugarcoat or use metaphysical malpractice or spiritual malpractice or bypass to go around it and say, well, there's only one God and all is well and that's it. And so this never gets addressed. So for us, it's about how can we be progressive? How can we be radically inclusive? Like, how can we do this? We have to address this and then represent it in the community.
Now, do you think some of the challenges with having these conversations is that, I guess in most cases of some of the New Thought teachings, it does focus on the self. So if you're an individual that's not connected to an issue, you're not going to, I don't want to say you're not going to care, but it's like, it doesn't connect with you, it doesn't resonate with you. So how can you be in these environments to educate people how, we always say that people are interconnected. We are in a global society, we are connected. But some people don't realize that. So how do you address the interconnectedness without waiting until that situation happens to them? Which I feel like it's kind of like, okay, well, it's like, okay, well, great, it's now happening to you, so now here you come. But how do you build the awareness so it doesn't have to get to that point, like coming late to the party or, the kind of situation?
On any given Sunday, we have people who come in that are perhaps going on with a little crisis in their own life. And so we have this basic tenet that we're there to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. So what we're really doing on a Sunday is attempting to raise consciousness. If people aren't aware, it's not just the environment. I mean, it's all the other issues that Dr. Ray mentioned. That we want to come from a place that we're not just reacting to whatever's going on in the world, but we're giving people tools to be able to respond from that place of knowing their own self-worth. So it really is seeking to comfort anyone who's upset about what's going on, but also to be able to listen to their story. And we do have interactivity at our centers. So we often have get-togethers where people, can feel listened to. And of course we have pastoral care and the one-on-one. We have a lot of spiritual coaches. We call them practitioners. So a lot of that one-on-one to inspire people and to remind them that this is a place where, we can figure it out together, we can take the best practices, we can listen to people like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. There's so many people that have done such great things. And so by constantly teaching about nonviolence and about these basic principles that support social justice, I think that here, particularly here in DC, we can start to raise the consciousness and make a positive difference.
And to bridge the whole separation of, well, I'm me and the philosophy works for me and you're you and it works for you and I don't have to worry about. I always say to people, if we lived in one house and we have 3 different levels of the house and I'll be at the top, she can be in the middle, you're at the bottom, right? And she starts setting a fire in her room. Does that affect us? Should we be concerned about it? It's her floor, it's her room, but somehow the smoke is going to get to the rest of the house.
Exactly.
So I tell people, just because you're not gay, just because you're not black, just because you're not Muslim doesn't mean this stuff doesn't still affect you.
Right.
If we are all one body, one human body, then what happens to, if I cut the circulation off of this one finger, it's going to affect the rest of the body. So if we want to be healthy humans, we have to be our brothers and sisters keepers.
That's a powerful way. I like how that was said. And I think that's a core thing, because I feel like it's a kind of an isolation. And I know a lot of faith communities go through the similar issue about how they're in bubbles, and you have people who are like, us doing the work in the community to educate and inform about different traditions and so forth. But it seems like with social justice in the New Thought movement, it's still kind of like, it's still foreign territory. Or it's, in the case of politics, some people may say, well, I don't want to discuss politics in my church, but it's not necessarily you're talking about politics. Like you said, the smoke. So if there's a law or a policy that affects a certain population or a certain group, it does really affect everybody. And people really, they really haven't connected it until you see some kind of major change within a community. So it's fascinating. I'll be curious to hear your perspective of the Ministers' March. Was it just ministers? Was it ministers or clergy? Was it interfaith?
Oh, Reverend Al Sharpton was there.
Yeah, I think the way it was promoted was, the goal was, we want 1,000 ministers to march, to gather together. Mm-hmm. And somewhere in there, they ended up with far more than the 1,000. But there were, the main thing was ministers of various faiths. So whether it was the Jewish faith, the Muslim faith, like everybody was there. But there were also lay people there who were supporting their communities. So it ended up being like 7,000 some people, I think, that gathered.
Oh, wow.
But one interesting thing was, while we were marching, and you hear in the back, no justice, no peace, no justice, no peace. And being involved in New Thought, we know that your thoughts create.
Right.
So if you are speaking the affirmation of no justice, no peace, you are saying
That's
there
what
is
you're
no.
affirming.
That's what you're affirming. And as it's said in Unity, our thoughts are prayers, and we are always praying. Mm-hmm. Be mindful of what you're saying.
Yeah.
So we hear no justice, no peace, and I said, wouldn't it be funny if it was, instead of N-O, justice, K-N-O-W, justice. No justice, and then peace, or vice versa.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
of course.
And that's why I feel like it's so important to have the New Thought community at the table, because you can provide that perspective. Because sometimes, and even, I hate to say from a generational, well, we might use the word hate, from a generational perspective, how does the stuff of the movements from back in the day is relevant now? Particularly because the future generations, or the coming in generations that's going to be doing all this, want to see something different. They're actually expecting something different. So when you say no justice, K-N-O-W, that can draw a totally different crowd and bring a totally different perspective. Because I'm always curious to see how New Thought is going to be able to come into these spaces and really change the dialogue of what's being said around social justice, because you bring a totally different perspective to what people have been hearing over probably, 50, 100 years, or however long we had these kind of issues going on in the country. And I really think New Thought is a necessary, thing to have.
Agreed.
Now, let's get back again to the centers and the churches and temples or whatever we have. I'm thinking like, New Thought attracts everybody. You got progressives, you got conservatives, you got Republicans, you got Democrats, you got independents, and all kinds of every thought under the same umbrella. How do ministers doing the work like you, and when we go through particularly political changes or even just social changes, how do you manage noticing the shifts in your population and the mood, if elections and things go a certain way? Maybe if one candidate wins or loses, people may be super excited and other people may not come back for a while. How do you handle all that, in your churches, knowing a lot of the issues that causes people to react the way they are is rooted in some kind of social action or social justice situation?
Well, the way I handle it, we call ourselves a center, because we're not a synagogue, we're not a temple, we're not a church, so we call ourselves a center. And I had the honor of working for the United Nations for 6 years, and I worked, in different countries around the world. So that's the other part of it, is that I'm always encouraging people who live in the United States to learn about other countries. And I believe we can always go to principle. We can always find that universal truth, like civil rights, like human rights. And so that's where we're teaching from. And that is something that applies to all humans, and even all creatures, that like the Buddhists, we respect all creatures. And so if we always go back to those universal principles, then we can find that common ground and teach from there.
And I think that's why the social justice piece is so difficult for most people, because they don't do that. They don't go to universal principle. Social justice is about black and white, not universal principle. Because if you go to universal principle, then it's not just about black and white, it's about human. Then how is this group of humans, how are they treated differently from this group of humans? Now let's address that. Then it becomes an open conversation instead of a fight or a battle.
So speaking of fighting battles, what do you do in situations where people from opposite ends, even all in the umbrella, but they're opposite ends, and to try to have the dialogue can be a challenge? How do you create the safe spaces to provide those type of dialogues, to have those conversations, or do you just let it fizzle out? How can communities that have so much diversity in their political beliefs or their spiritual beliefs be able to come together in a New Thought Center to talk about these kind of issues?
So I think it's pretty much like any family.
Okay.
You're going to have that one uncle or that one aunt who just, no matter where you tell them you want to go to college, they're not going to listen to you. But they're still your uncle or your aunt. So there's a certain level of, we just have to agree to disagree.
Okay.
And I'm going to love you in spite of. The love is the universal principle. It's showing up as us, in us, and through us. So I have to see through the political affiliation, through whatever the separation is, to that one place where there's complete unity. And in that place, I understand that we don't agree, but for right now, that doesn't matter. Because I don't have to let my emotions get involved where, wait a minute, what do you mean you don't agree? Well, do you know who she voted for? It doesn't have to become that. It's, okay, can you tell me what is it about that candidate that you voted for? Oh, that I didn't realize that. And we can still have a conversation even though there's a gentleman, I can't think of his name right now, but he's made it his mission to go to various clan leaders and have conversation with them, become their friend, and then collect their clan memorabilia in robes. This man is willing to have the difficult conversations, to love these people through the hood, through the burning cross, and still come out the other side and say, I may not be able to convert them all, may not be able to convince them all, but I can still love them all. And that's the thing that makes the difference.
I can give you a concrete example. There was a woman who came to one of our services, and on that particular service, I was talking about the Black Lives Matter movement.
Go ahead.
And she was really upset. And it turned out, and we had a conversation afterwards, back and forth, and I was really glad that she engaged in the conversation with me, because I felt like she had a lot of misinformation about the Black Lives Matter movement.
Okay, yeah.
And she thought that it was a movement that was set up to, instigate violence against people, against police officers. There was like a movement to fight back, and of course we know that it's not that at all. So just, without getting political, there's a way that we can inform people and bring source. We've got such great resources in Washington, D.C. that we can bring speakers that are doing great work and have them explain what their work is to try to combat some of that ignorance.
And you made a good point, because I think a lot of communities don't have the resources to know about the issues. It's still new for a lot of communities because, again, it's pretty much been more of the kind of reserved, services and things like that. So now to see these issues really, when they start to hit home, it's like, oh my goodness, how are we going to handle Black Lives Matter? How are we going to talk about white supremacy? And I've been doing research, and a lot, not just in New Thought, but a lot of Christian communities are struggling with how to address it effectively, where there isn't the issue of somehow some form of division can arise in a congregation and people won't come back to their faith communities. So I think one key thing is to make sure like resources are available to do that, and to kind of like, because as we know, education is very key in battling stereotypes. And again, when we get stuck as communities, I think of Unity because that's the church and the community I'm affiliated with. When we get stuck or we end up falling behind, we're not able to be like that positive force to make the change because we're still trying to figure it out. And realistically, I look at it and I'm like, these issues really aren't new. I think it's just now a perspective of it's coming to these communities where it's like, it's time for you to address these now. You can't keep sitting on the sidelines and be wallflowers, and I've been very vocal about. You got, you have
Thank
to
you.
be, and I think New Thought community brings a lot. And there are a lot of people who are looking for this type of message. But we have to be ready and be aware, be ready, have the proper education to be able to explain, this is where we stand. We are, we are like a united force. So this is where we stand in a positive way. There are things we can do and make sure people in our communities don't feel left out, because that's the other thing we don't want to do.
I just wanted to add one thing. New Thought as a whole in and of itself is a progressive movement. So at a time when women couldn't vote and women were supposed to be barefoot pregnant in the kitchen, there were many women stepping forward, becoming leaders of New Thought. Myrtle Fillmore,
Yes.
Emma Curtis Hopkins, these women stepped forward at a time and became leaders who then, Emma Curtis Hopkins trained the Fillmores, trained Holmes, became the teacher of teachers. Somewhere in there though, this now generation of New Thought folk, we've gotten complacent. And I think it's time to return to the roots of we're supposed to always be evolving, ever evolving consciousness, not hit a plateau, I've arrived and I'm done, but it's supposed to ever be going, ever be growing, ever be evolving.
Because you get stale, it gets boring, it gets old. And I, of course, look again, generations, and like Gen Xers, millennials, and after, who are looking again, could be looking for a community like this. But if the generations before aren't addressing them, how are you going to incorporate and connect and be that bridge to the generations coming after you? Because I know from experience, do you do social justice work? Well, not really, and it's a revolving door. Those young people are not going to stay. They're looking for a community that agrees with their beliefs, and B, how can they give their gifts back? So if they're activists or whatever, or they've done work in advocacy and so forth, not to say we're going out here and going to support one candidate or the other, but it could just be an issue to just raise awareness. And if you don't have that space for that, or you don't have the knowledge of that, or you're still trying to figure out how to speak on a certain issue, again, you're missing out on people who can really benefit from what these communities have to offer.
Agreed.
It used to be said that Sundays were the most segregated day of the week,
Yes.
and that's not true in our community. We're so grateful that we have great diversity, and we've got lots of little kids. They are the joy of our Sundays, having little kids with us, and I think that people really appreciate coming to a place where they can interact with people they might not normally, might not be their neighbors, but that on Sundays can come together and interact with different people.
So what makes it successful for your community to be as diverse as it is? When you say you have, what do you attribute to the success of the diversity and the inclusion?
Because
I got lucky and found Dr.
like Reverend Alex just mentioned, her experience with the UN, her global experience.
So it's
she has a lot of
being out there.
background that says be open and involved in all of these. So of course when a center is founded on a minister that's where they're coming from, then everything that they're now attracting has to follow that mission and that vision. I think if somebody comes from a place of the only thing I know is I'm a 50-year-old white man and this is what I know and this is how I am and this is how it's been and this is how it's always going to be, then that's what I'm going to attract. And if I don't know, like I always tell people when people say, "Oh, I love gay people and I love Hispanics and I love," yes, and I say, "Do you have any friends who are? Like, do you ever have coffee with someone who is a lesbian or coffee with someone who's a Muslim, or do you have that they are close to you?" Because if not, then how do you really know what that even means?
Right.
You know theoretically what it means, but you don't know like deeply what that means. So because Reverend Alex is already inclusive in her being,
Yeah, you can definitely
the center is
pick that
going
up.
to attract it.
Yeah, I was totally sold. When I saw what you guys are doing, I'm like,
Well, Dr. A is right now teaching an American Sign Language class, and it's just so exciting to think about being able to reach out to the deaf community also.
wow. And wow, time is wrapping up. I only feel like we talked for 10 minutes, really. So any final things you want to share, like websites,
Oh
social
yes,
media?
please
about your-
visit our website. It's csldc.org.
Okay. Same you? Okay. All right. Well, thank both of you so much
Thank
for
you.
coming on.
Namaste.
I would love to have you on again and discuss this because I have a feeling once this airs, you probably get some comments.
Our pleasure.
And thank you, our audience, for watching Interfaith Connections today. Hope you learned a lot and something new about the New Thought community and what they're doing in social justice. And you can check my website for the show at www.interfaithconnections.squarespace.com or check us out on Twitter and follow us there at www.twitter.com/IFC TV show. Thank you so much for watching. Take care. Have a good day. Bye-bye.